We have been discussing about the paper Introduction to Philosophy, which is introduced to semester 1 students of University of Delhi from the Department of Philosophy, and that is a DSE discipline specific core paper. We have been engaging about the various issues about this theme Introduction to Philosophy vis-a-vis epistemology and metaphysics. We continue further discussing the same in our today's lecture. This is Dr. Ananya Barua, Associate Professor in the Department of Philosophy, Hindu College. Now, the first thing that we would be checking out is how did the journey begin? And in philosophy, we understand that the journey begins from wonder and world explanation. If we are to talk about the ancient period, we see that the term or the theme metaphysics is taken as the first impulse, which is basically that philosophy begins in wonder. Early thinkers asked questions like, what is the world made of? What truly exists beneath change? Metaphysics was cosmological and ontological. No separation yet between what exists and how we know. And some of the key figures who had metaphysized such questions can be traced as Thales, Heraclitus, Parmenides, Plato, Aristotle. For them and beyond, metaphysics at this stage has been in confident, world-facing and constructive stage. Then, of course, the connect with epistemology, and we see that epistemology is still implicit, where knowledge was assumed possible. Truth was thought to mirror reality. Epistemology existed inside metaphysics, not independently. Knowledge was not yet a problem, being was. And this is where we see the interconnect of metaphysics and epistemology. So to claim that metaphysics and epistemology are independent categories, yes, they are to a certain extent, but a closer look gives us the view that they both are dependent on each other. Now, in the stage of the classical synthesis, which is from Plato to Aristotle, we see a harmonious balance. Plato, with his knowledge is possible because reality has a rational structure, and for Plato, his relational or the rational structure has been the theory of forms, further expedited the vision of metaphysics. Aristotle had coined that knowledge arises from sense experience and it is refined by the intellect. So in the classical synthesis, we see metaphysics grounds epistemology. Epistemology validates metaphysics. In a way, there has been a balanced co-evolution and not really a rivalry between the two. The third stage of metaphysics vis-a-vis epistemology can be traced to the medieval period. Medieval period where one can see of metaphysics as theology and epistemology as faith, reason, mediation. Here in the medieval period, metaphysics dominates. Reality is God-centered. Being is explained through divine causation. Thinkers like Augustine, Aquinas, Avicenna are some of the philosophers who were considered as the benchmarks for taking metaphysics as theology and epistemology as faith, reason, mediation. Epistemology serves metaphysics in ways where knowledge is grounded in divine illumination, which has been the take of St. Augustine, reason perfected by faith of St. Aquinas. So we see epistemology becomes a handmaiden to metaphysics. Then comes the fourth stage, which is also called as the Great Turn. This is to do with the modern epistemological anxiety, which is somewhere between 17th to 18th century. The modern epistemological anxiety deals with the dialogues or the times of the crisis, the rise of science, collapse of traditional authority, religious conflict. Here, in this fourth stage, epistemology takes center stage. We can name philosophers like Descartes, who doubted everything. And he did this to secure knowledge first. So we see that metaphysics, which was the center stage till phase 3, from phase 4 onwards, epistemology takes the center stage. Nevertheless, both epistemology and metaphysics are interconnected. Some of the other philosophers in this fourth stage or the great turn phase have been Locke, Berkeley, Hume. These philosophers question innate ideas, causality, substance. Philosophy thus shifts from what is real to what can we know for certain. Metaphysics now appears as suspicious. In the fifth stage, we have Immanuel Kant, the great mediator. A turning point here, for metaphysics cannot proceed unchecked. Epistemology sets conditions and limits. Kant's move has been that he talks about how we know phenomena, not noumena. Mind structures experience. Metaphysics survives, but with epistemic boundaries. In the sixth stage, the 19th century, we see expansion and fragmentation, where metaphysics is reimagined. We have philosophers like Hegel, who talks about absolute spirit unfolding historically. Schopenhauer, who talks about will as the thing in itself. Nietzsche, who criticizes or talks about the critique of metaphysical absolutes. We also have epistemology diversifies, where we see historicism, psychologism, pragmatism. So in a way, there is no single center, neither metaphysics nor epistemology, for multiple paths emerged from the sixth phase or the 19th century onwards. The seventh phase, the 20th century, there's crisis, there's rejection, and there is renewal, and there are also the anti-metaphysical movements. These are loudly seen in movements such as logical positivism, where metaphysics is considered meaningless. We also see the beginning of the early analytic philosophy, where language replaces ontology. Further, we see epistemology becomes technical. There is the logic component prefixed by the justification component to make belief systems well proved or well grounded in the very famous justified true belief system. There also have been counter movements. Parallelly, we see phenomenology of Husserl, where the quest has been to return to lived experience. We also see Heidegger, where there has been a revival of the question of being. And of course, in our Indian and Buddhist philosophies, which have been rediscovered, metaphysics returns transformed. In the eighth phase, we can talk about the contemporary philosophy, like the entanglement rather than opposition. In a way, we are no longer holding metaphysics and epistemology as thesis and antithesis. Rather, we see them in continuity. Today, metaphysics and epistemology are deeply intertwined. For example, when we talk about philosophy of mind, philosophy of science, social epistemology, environmental metaphysics, we see the interface of epistemology and metaphysics. So the questions that are now asked are, is reality mind dependent? Is knowledge socially situated? Can metaphysics be naturalized? So neither discipline dominates, neither metaphysics nor epistemology, they co-evolve. So for the evolution of the one, the existence of the other is significant and vice versa. Also, there is a ninth stage in this entire epistemology metaphysics debate, which we can state as the comparative insight. Here we are bringing in the Indian perspective. In Indian traditions, the journey is less antagonistic. Metaphysics and epistemology grow hand in hand. Knowledge is often and mostly evaluated by its transformative power. Example, Advaita Vedanta is basically wrong metaphysics, which is equivalent to bondage, and right knowledge is equivalent to liberation. So we see on the one hand, there is knowledge, epistemology, which leads us to metaphysics or the concept of liberation. Thus, we see the journey in one metaphor, where metaphysics is the traveler seeking the landscape, epistemology is the compass, checking whether the path is trustworthy. At times, the traveler rushes ahead. At times, the compass refuses to move. Philosophy advances only when both walk together. So we see that the journey of metaphysics and epistemology has moved from early confidence in explaining reality through medieval synthesis into modern epistemological doubt, followed by Kantian mediation, 20th century skepticism, and contemporary reintegration. While metaphysics constructs accounts of being, epistemology continuously questions the grounds of such constructions. Their history is not one of linear progress, but of mutual correction, where philosophy renews itself by negotiating the tension between what exists and how it can be known. We also need to check here the detailed journey of metaphysics and epistemology. In the 6th-5th century BCE, the pre-Socratic period, in metaphysics we understand that it all originated in wonder. The search was about arche, the search for the arche, which is also considered the first principle of reality. Reality explained cosmologically. Epistemology, on the other hand, in the pre-Socratic period, was implicit and unproblematic. Knowledge was assumed to mirror reality. Key figures, as we understand, are Thales, Anaximander, Heraclitus, Parmenides. However, the shift slowly started happening where systematic inquiry into being and reality happened from the classical Greek period onwards. Distinction between appearance and reality was taken seriously. In epistemology, we see that early reflections on knowledge, truth, and opinion started. Knowledge has been linked in this phase with rational structures of reality, and this is where epistemology takes a classical shift. In the Hellenistic and the Roman period, which is about 3rd century BCE to 3rd century CE, metaphysics has been largely considered ethical and cosmological metaphysics, like the Stoics, the Neoplatonism, and so on. Reality was structured by logos or the one. Epistemology, on the other hand, was taken as rise of skepticism, where questioning certainty and criteria of truth were considered important. Some of the key figures of these phase has been Epicurus, Zeno, Plotinus, and Sextus Empiricus. Going ahead, we see during the 5th and the 14th century metaphysics which was dominated by theology. It has been identified with God as the first cause. In epistemology, on the other hand, knowledge had been grounded in faith-reason synthesis, divine illumination, and scholastic rationality coexisted. Further, in the 17th and 18th century, we see that metaphysics was taken as the traditional metaphysics questioned, and the substance, causality, and self came under scrutiny. In the epistemological zone, we see in the early modern period, this becomes a much more foundational discipline. Methodological doubt and theories of knowledge took center stage. This is so because in the 17th century, René Descartes comes up with his philosophy of dubito ergo sum, which technically is I doubt, therefore I am. His dubito ergo sum further goes ahead to cogito ergo sum, which is I think, therefore I am. So what we see in the early modern period, doubting is taking the center stage. With doubting, we also have a doubter who is doubting. And with this process of doubting, we establish the existence of the doubter / the epistemological thinker. This is why the early modern period, or the modern period started by René Descartes, is called as the time of cogito, or the time of consciousness, or the time of rationality, where reasoning takes the front seat and the other non-rational or the non-reasonable items takes the back seat. Some of the key figures, of course, we understand by now, has to be Descartes for his work on Meditations on First Philosophy, Locke for his work on Essay Concerning Human Understanding, Hume for his work Inquiry Concerning Human Understanding. So be it Descartes, be it Locke, be it Hume, we see that there has been an emergence of rationalism, empiricism, idealism, and so on and so forth. So if on the one hand, the thinkers believe that rationality or reasoning is the only source of knowledge, the empiricists believe that it is the sense perception which only gives us true knowledge, not otherwise. And they belong to the key modern period. Further, with the late 18th century, we see a Kantian turn where metaphysics was restricted and redefined. Knowledge of noumena denied. And in epistemology, we see conditions of possibility of knowledge has been analyzed. So the mind structures experience has gained popularity. Some of the primary readings for this section definitely has been with Kant's critique of pure reason. As we go ahead, we see that in the 19th century, metaphysics then comes to be zeroed in with absolute idealism, will, and critique of absolutes. Epistemology zeroes in with historicism, Hegel, Schopenhauer, Nietzsche. We see the emergence of pragmatism and perspectivism. So there are various isms coming up by the turn it is 19th century. By early 20th century, we had mentioned about the crisis and the rejection phase. So metaphysics declared meaningless by logical positivism. Epistemology has been considered highly technical and analytic, and the focus has largely been on language, logic, and justification. Some of the key movements has been about logical positivism, early analytic philosophy, and so on and so forth. Now the stage comes where there is the mid-late 20th century where metaphysics is renewed but with a new jacket. Here, revival through phenomenology and existentialism takes the front seat. Questions of being is reopened. Epistemology is all about lived experience and embodiment emphasized. The key figures have definitely been Husserl, Heidegger, Merleau-Ponty, and others. Now, in the contemporary philosophy, which is from the late 20th to 21st century, we see that metaphysics and epistemology share a deep interdependence. They both, in both of them, we see there is an engagement with science, with mind, society, and environment. Some of the key areas where their interaction is vividly seen is in the field of philosophy of mind, social epistemology, environmental metaphysics, and so on and so forth. Thus, we see a trend where philosophy moves forward whenever metaphysics and epistemology are correct, restrain and enrich one another. So we cannot only say that it is only metaphysics or it is only epistemology. The interconnection of both metaphysics and epistemology, when restrained, corrected, they enrich the other. Now, the question that should be striking all of us at this stage, now that we have understood the interconnection of metaphysics and epistemology, is why did metaphysics and epistemology originate at all? What was the need of us to be discussing about these domains? Now, both metaphysics and epistemology arise because from a single primordial human impulse. And what is this impulse? The impulse is the desire to understand reality and our place within it. However, this impulse bifurcates into two distinct questions. The first is, what is ultimately real? Where metaphysics picks up those questions. The second part of the question or the impulse is, how do we know anything at all? This is where epistemology comes to the picture. Historically, metaphysics comes first. Epistemology emerges later as a critical self-reflection on metaphysical claims. Now, when we talk about the origin of metaphysics and we check the meaning and etymology, we see that it is derived from the Greek terms metaphysika, which means what comes after physics or beyond physics. Aristotle's works dealing with being, substance, cause and reality were placed after his physics. Thus, metaphysics asks questions like, what exists? What is being? Is reality one or many? Is there a first cause? What is the nature of soul, God, time and change? We thus see the comparison here in the PPT which is being displayed. The early metaphysical thinkers, the Western thinkers, the pre-Socratic, the 6th to 5th century BCE, these philosophers sought the arche as the first principle. The philosopher Thales sought everything is water as arche. With Anaximander, it is the apeiron or the boundless. With Heraclitus, we see that the position of the arche for him has been flux or becoming. For Parmenides, it is reality is one, unchanging being, and for Democritus, atoms and void were considered to be their metaphysical claim. So in the early metaphysical or the 6th to 5th century BCE, the claims were all about metaphysical. Whatever epistemological questions, even if there were any, they came under the umbrella term of metaphysics. So metaphysics begins as cosmology and ontology. Now, with Plato and Aristotle, we see that there is two levels of reality. The world of forms, which is true reality, and the world of appearance, which is sensible. Metaphysics is deeply connected to also ethics and knowledge. Aristotle defines metaphysics as the science of being qua being, which the key ideas are substance, the four causes, potentiality and actuality, and he establishes metaphysics as a systematic discipline. In a way, Aristotle is also considered the father of classical metaphysics. Now, if we look at metaphysics in Indian philosophy, a brief parallel as in the PPT that is being displayed here, metaphysics inquiry appears earlier and more integrally in Indian traditions than in the Western traditions. In the school of the Upanishads, we see the metaphysical focus is of Brahman, Atman identity. In the Sankhya philosophy, it is all about the dualism of Purusha and Prakriti. In the Vedanta philosophy, we see it is to do with non-dual or qualified non-dual reality. With Buddhism, it is all about impermanence, non-self, and dependent origination. So, metaphysics in the Indian philosophy is often soteriological, that is, it is linked to liberation. That is to say, if you are gaining knowledge, you are gaining knowledge to attain liberation. Knowledge without the quest of liberation is incomplete. Unlike in the West, where you are gaining knowledge because you are interested in gaining knowledge. you do not have an end goal, or you do not have the concept of liberation or moksha there. This is the very basic distinction between Indian epistemologists and Western epistemologists. So Indian epistemologists, be it the Astika or the Nastika, bearing Charvaka, even Jainism and Buddhism, they talk about knowledge to be gathered for the liberation part. And this is why metaphysics in Indian philosophy is often linked to liberation, which is called as soteriological. We now, in our next lecture, will be talking about the origin of epistemology, and we will further continue this journey. Thank you so much.